Well, good morning, or rather good afternoon. Welcome to this joint overview and scrutiny committee. I'm Councillor Alistair McCraw and I'm chairing the meeting today. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use, that you do not interrupt other speakers, and that if you attend the meeting to speak and you persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure that mobile phones are either on silent or switched off. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed, and by entering this meeting as a speaker, you're also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. So, to introductions, I'll now ask the Governance Officer to carry out the introductions.
Thank you, Chair. So today the Cabinet members present are Councillor Julie Flatman, Mid-Suffolk Cabinet Member for Communities. I am not sure I saw Councillor Davis. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm just checking. I don't think Councillor Davis.
I looked in the attendance. I couldn't see him.
No, that's fine. So, okay, and other councillors in attendance are also Councillor Morley, Councillor Ayres, Councillor Maybury, and Councillor Jan Osborne. The officers present today are Vicky Mosley, Corporate Manager for Communities, and I think Jan Robinson, Deputy Monitor Officer and Corporate Manager for Governance and Civic Office. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrietta. Can I move to the agenda, please, now? Item 1 on today's agenda is apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies. However, I will do a roll call of members now. Please can members answer or respond when I call your name, please. Councillor Dawson.
Here.
Councillor Gould.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Grandin.
Here.
Councillor McCraw.
Present.
Councillor McLaren.
Present.
And Councillor Adrian Osborne.
Good afternoon. Present.
Councillor Carter.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Caston.
Present.
Councillor Epkin-Young.
Present.
Councillor Muller.
Present.
Councillor Scarf.
Present.
And Councillor Wellham.
Present.
Thank you, Chair. All members are present.
Thank you. Item 2 is to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare? Councillor Epkin-Young. Oh, sorry, no, it's Councillor Muller. I apologise.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I should declare that I am a member of the Mid-Suffolk Citizens Advice Trustee Board. Thank you.
That would be entirely non-pecuniary, and
yeah.
So that doesn't exclude you from any part of the discussion or voting. Any others? In that case, we'll go to item 3, which is JOS 2011, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 23rd of November 2020. These minutes were deferred from the last committee meeting. If members can turn to those pages, are there any points regarding the accuracy of those minutes? Then can I ask for a proposer, please?
Happy to propose, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Councillor Muller proposing, and a seconder, please.
Yeah, happy to second. Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Councillor Wellham. If that's everything, we shall now conduct an electronic vote, and I'll ask the Governance Officer to carry that out. Members are directed to the voting screen.
Thank you, Chair. Member, can you please cast your vote on the app now under item JOS 2011. If you click on the plus button at the top of your agenda and then again at the plus, actually the vote should be started. I can see my colleague hasn't started it yet, so let's do that.
That's now showing in blue.
That should be in progress now. Councillor Grandin, are you okay for voting on the modern.gov app?
I've done it. Has it not been received?
Not yet. I can take your vote.
Well, I did vote for.
That's fine. We'll put you for.
I have actually submitted it, but I think it must be my.
That's fine. That's fine.
Did you confirm it? Did you confirm it, Councillor Grandin?
Yes, I did.
Oh, fine. Okay. Something weird going on?
Yes, I have.
Yes, that's fine, Chair. With Councillor
Grandin. Technical issues.
Fine.
That's fine. Chair, with the Councillor Grandin's vote, the vote is 12 votes for.
Thank you very much. So that's passed. We shall now move to the minutes of the meeting. There have been confirmed and will be signed at the next practicable opportunity. Item 4 is confirmation of the minutes of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 14th of December 2020. These minutes will be deferred to the next Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting in March. Item 5, BOS 25, is to confirm the Babergh minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of January. So please note that only Babergh members can vote on this item. So Babergh members, are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? In that case, can I have a proposer, please?
I'll propose it. Dawson, Councillor Dawson.
Councillor Dawson, thank you very much. And a seconder, please.
Sorry, Councillor McLaren, seconding.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLaren. I'll now ask the Governance Officer to conduct the electronic vote. Once again, only the Babergh members are to vote upon this item.
That's fine. Members, if you can please cast your vote on the app. The vote should be in progress. If you scroll down to item BOS 25 and click on the cross, you should be able to, or the plus sign, you should be able to vote now. I can see a lot of you are doing it anyway, so I'll be quiet.
I note that in fact there are 2 confirm buttons you have to press one after the other, so that may be the reason for some earlier confusion.
And let's see. I'm still missing 1 vote.
Do we know which member that would be?
Oh.
Sorry, Henry, I think you've received all of the votes from the Babergh members.
Yes, I think so too. So that is unanimous. That's 6 votes for, Chair.
Thank you very much. And those minutes will be confirmed.
Sorry, it's 5 votes for
5 votes
and
for.
1 abstention.
1 abstention. OK, that's fine.
I was going to say Councillor Gould here.
Oh, I do apologise. I do apologise.
Were not present, Councillor Gould. I quite understand. The minutes of that meeting have now been confirmed and will be signed at the next practicable opportunity. Item 6 on the agenda is MOS 25 to confirm the Mid-Suffolk minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of January 2021. Please note that only Mid-Suffolk members can vote on this item. I'll ask them if there are any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes. In that case, can I have a proposer, please?
Happy to propose, Chair, Councillor Muller.
Thank you very much, Councillor Muller. And a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair. Councillor Ekpenyong here.
Thank you very much, Paul. In that case, I'll ask Henrietta to carry out the electronic vote. Mid-Suffolk members only here.
So, yes, members, please, if you can cast your vote on the app now, please, the vote should be in progress for item MOS 25. I'll keep an eye on. So, Chair, we have 6 vote for, which is unanimous.
Okay, once again, those minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of January 2021 have been confirmed and will be signed at the next practicable opportunity. Item 7 on the agenda. We seem to have lost Councillor Osborne, who appears to want to come back in again, so we'll just allow that to happen.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, I think we now have Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. No problem at all. Item 7 on the agenda is to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petitions scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 8 is questions from the public.
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. And item 9, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move to item 7 on the agenda, or is it item 10? I must admit I'm having a little difficulty with numbering here, but it is item 10, and this is the annual review of Local Citizens Advice, LCA for short. Now, I don't know if this will be possible, but I'd like to invite Vicky Mosley, the Corporate Manager for Communities, to introduce report JOS 20/12. I noticed that we have one of the Cabinet members present in Councillor Flatman, and if Councillor Flatman wishes to add anything, more than happy to hear that alongside the presentation. So over to Vicky.
Hi, thank you, Chair. This is just a very, very short report, primarily acknowledging the Cabinet's decisions back in January 2020 to award both Stowmarket and Sudbury Districts CAs with 3-year funding agreements. So they are now in place, and my grants officers are currently working through the details with those CAs, and also to introduce basically the presentation that you'll be receiving later on this session from the CAs direct. At the time of writing this report, however, we did receive confirmation from Thetford and Diss that they wouldn't be applying for a revenue grant from us for 21-22. So I've also added that into the report. So, like I said, it's a very short report, primarily introducing the presentation that you're about to receive from the CA. So unless there are any questions for me, then it's probably best to just review or listen to the presentation that's coming up.
Yes, I think that's probably appropriate. At this point, can I ask members that have any questions of Vicky? Councillor Muller.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, Vicky. Because Diss, Thetford and the District CA no longer require that funding, do residents who make use of this service in those areas, do they actually live in Mid-Suffolk? And if so, could that funding be transferred to the Mid-Suffolk Citizens Advice? Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a conversation that might come up in the presentation. So certainly what seems to have happened with Thetford and Diss is that a lot of their customers were due to from the footfall from the shopping that's existed over the last year. But we know that through COVID, most of the shops have been forced to close. Therefore, the regular footfall has disappeared as well. Therefore, the demand on the service hasn't been what it could have been or would have been. But yeah, there's definitely a conversation I think to have with Stowmarket CA with regards to how we move forward in terms of where those customers would typically come from, and we'll be in touch anyway with Thetford and Diss to maintain an ongoing dialogue with them to see how, if anything changes with their situation as the next year progresses, and then we'll have another conversation with them. But we'll need to absolutely capture where those customers come from, and I think that conversation could happen as part of the presentation later.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I note we have questions from Councillor Scarf and then Councillor Epignon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. On page 44, Table 1 shows a £500 contribution by Babergh District Council to Sudbury and District CA. However, on page 46 in section 8, it shows 35,500. I'm sure that's a typo. Could we just have clarification on that?
Yes, that's been confirmed already, Councillor Scarf. It was picked up in the papers in preparation.
Okay,
we were primed for this small point. In fact, the leader of one of the councils was only too keen to point this out to me. So I think we'll let that pass. But yes,
that's good.
These things happen. Councillor Epignon and then Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chairman. And actually, Councillor Scarf just asked one of the questions I was going to pose, but actually a little bit of clarity. Is it 53 or is it 35?
It's 53. It's the larger figure.
Okay, super. So my second question is with regards to section 5 and 6 of the report. And it does seem to me that given that the award is for a 3-year period, we appear to be placing a rather severe admin burden on the CA in terms of reporting and reapplying for funding and repeating information that is unlikely to change in the course of the period. For example, presenting key policies over and over seems to me to be somewhat superfluous. And I just wondered why we have such a need for such a heavy admin burden on the CA.
Are you referring to para 5.3 here?
Well, 5.2, 5.3 and 6.1.
OK, that's fine. I mean, the reasons for those, if Vicky could answer those, that would be great. I mean, they are reasonable checks and balances.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to maintain reasonable checks and balances, and we are often scrutinised and asked to clarify what they are from time to time. So we do try to adhere to what our own internal processes are, which have been agreed as much as we possibly can. I think when my grants officers will be working alongside the CAs, and we will use an element of common sense. So where they have a policy that they've already provided and that lasts for a period of time, then we will already have that on file. So we will just, through conversation with them, acknowledge that we've already received those. So I think that administrative burden is reduced just by having those ongoing conversations with them. Thank you.
It's just a sort of mental reminder to keep in touch, I think, as much as anything else. And I mean, that's fascinating. That's useful for anybody. Councillor Wellham. Sorry, Councillor Epignon, did you want to follow up?
Yes, I appreciate Vicky's response, which does make sense. But I still don't understand the need for them to reapply annually for something that we've agreed for a 3-year period.
It feels complicated, but basically the annual application is for 3 years in advance. So when they apply, so when the CAs apply next year or this year for grant, it will be for the 3 years following. So they do have their annual 3-year their grant already secured, but each year it's almost topping those up, because what we will find is that as we have ongoing dialogue and we'll have quarterly, 6-monthly meetings, some of the activities, some of the work, some of the demands on their services will change one year to the next, and so we need to be able to make sure that our monitoring arrangements reflect the changes in demand in the service. And it also gives the opportunity for us to have a conversation with CAs around the amounts that they have, that they don't necessarily always remain static. And that's a conversation. Obviously, we are governed to some degree by how much we have in the overall budget, but that also provides some flexibility around that, albeit quite marginal. So I think it's mostly around not being too strict with what's been agreed one year to the next, but also about those monitoring arrangements and making sure that we can flex the work that they need to be doing, and that we can cover that off in the monitoring arrangements, so that we know that what they say they're delivering, that they actually are, and we can monitor that with them and change as we need to.
Does that help you, Councillor Epignon? If I could just add in that this is
not
actually,
entirely.
I think there's a statutory requirement, in fact, in applying for grants that requires an annual process, but it should be borne in mind that we are actually doing a 3-year rolling agreement, so that the council and the LCAs have some security of looking forward for each 3 years at a time, so that when we do the annual application, it's not just for that year, it's for the 2 subsequent years as well. So this keeps the process I think they've got some security. I see Tom Barker, who may have some input on this, which has his hand raised.
Yes, through you, Chair, and you have actually covered in large part the point that I was going to make, Councillor McCraw. But if we didn't require an annual grant process, then what they would be getting would be a 3-year grant, not a 3-year rolling grant. And if they just applied once every 3 years, then by the time you get to the 3rd year, they would be facing exactly the same scenario that councillors were keen that they avoided, which is that sense of a cliff edge at the end of the grant process. So as Vicky explained and as Councillor McCraw kind of amplified, we need to go through the annual process in order to continue to give them 3 years looking forward, because otherwise it would just be a 3-year grant rather than a rolling arrangement.
Yeah, the Joint Committee were keen that the security for the funding for the 3-year period was essential for them. I have Councillor Welham's hand raised, but I also know Councillor Davis is in the meeting and has his hand raised. Councillor Welham, would you rather hear from Councillor Davis first, or would you like to ask your question?
I'm happy to hear from Councillor Davis if he'd like to speak.
And I'll come back to you, Councillor Welham. Councillor Davis, as one of the cabinet members for the portfolio, I wonder if you had anything you wish to say.
Yeah, thank you very much. In fairness, Vicky and Tom have covered it very well, but from a cabinet perspective, just to assure Councillor Epping-Young that this was something we really discussed in depth. And as Tom has said in that piece there, which is the point I was going to make, it was very important that the 3-year rolling process did have an annual monitoring, very much a light touch, because the communities team will go through it with the CABs. But I just want him to be assured that this was looked at Cabinet before we made approval for the 3-year rolling budget for them. And that's pretty much everything else has been covered now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. Back to you, Councillor Welham.
Thank you, Chair. I've been looking at the risk assessments here, and there are 3 elements, and of those 2 are very high risk. And I just wanted to make sure that if there are funders withdrawing their funding, or if COVID continues, that there is still the ability for Mid-Suffolk and I guess for Babergh too, to increase funding. It's been possible during the COVID period through COVID funding. I just wanted to make sure that there would be the flexibility should funders reduce or withdraw their funding, or there be other problems associated with COVID, like the end of the furlough scheme.
OK. Vicky, can you address that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that the regular meetings that we have with the CAs will, like I said, on a quarterly basis, we'll always be keeping our sort of ear to the ground, working with them. So should that be the case, then we will look to do everything that we possibly can to support the CAs. Again, just having had a meeting with one of the CAs just last week, we are, aware that other funding has been reduced to support them, and we'd look to see what we could perhaps do to kind of fill those gaps. But there is a slight underspend in the revenue funds, but not a significant. So we would have to look across the whole piece as to what the organisations, the council's priorities are in terms of spends, because we can only spend what we have within the actual budget.
It's going to be a very changeable position for the foreseeable future. Right, I think if members of the committee have completed their questions to the corporate manager, I'd like to ask if any other members present have any questions, but this would be specifically for the corporate manager and the short presentation that was given. Are there any such members? OK, in the absence of any hands, I'll remind you we'll be debating the issues after both presentations and questions to the local citizens' advice. So we'll now move on to that presentation from the local citizens' advice. Can I introduce the chief officers attending and the ones who'll be providing the presentation? They are respectively Nikki Wilshire, the chief officer at Citizens' Advice Ipswich, Simon Clifton of Citizens' Advice Mid-Suffolk, and Colleen Sweeney of Sudbury and District Citizens' Advice. Thank you very much for attending, all 3 of you. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Henrietta, will you be sharing the screen for the presentation, please?
I am just working on getting it up. Let me
Thank you.
move things over so member can see. Can members see that?
Yes, that's come up now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colleen Sweeney. I'm the Chief Officer at Sudbury Citizens Advice. Thank you for inviting us back to speak to you all about how we've been managing to continue delivering our services and the impact of the pandemic over the past year. We do appreciate your interest in us. It certainly has been a strange year for all of us, and we do have some interesting updates as a result. We've put together a fairly brief presentation to cover the areas we were asked to, and also to allow questions at the end. Next slide, please, Henrietta. Okay, so by way of reminder for those of you who were present at our last joint scrutiny presentation, and to inform those of you who were not, I would like to speak briefly about who we are and what we do. As you will know, excuse me, we can all face problems that seem complicated and intimidating. At Citizens Advice, we believe no one should have to face these problems without good quality independent advice. We give people the knowledge and confidence to find their way forward, whoever they are and whatever their problem. So when we say whoever you are, we do not place any limits on the number of visits a client makes. We do not restrict to any particular beneficiary group. Anyone can come to see us for advice. And we do not judge people who come to see us for advice. And when we say whatever your problem, we give advice on an extensive range of areas, and we work with partners whenever people need more specific support or more specialist input that we do not have. And by what we mean when we say to find a way forward, we do not make decisions for clients. We present options and empower them to act, or assist further when the client is considered to have more need for in-depth support. We match the support we give to clients' needs. So we do have clients who just need us to point them in the right direction, and we do have other clients who need more support. It's a case of assessing how confident each person is and the right approach for them. Next slide, please. Okay, so just short of a year ago, we were all beginning to realise that we may be moving towards an unprecedented situation where we would need to make changes to the delivery of our services whilst ensuring that we remained available to our clients at a time that they would need us more than ever. Fortunately, we were all able to act quickly and keep the wheels turning. There were different approaches and decisions made at each LCA based on variants which included our buildings and space to work in.
Can I pause you there, Colleen? We appear to have lost the presentation screen. Perhaps if that could be attended to first. And you may find yourself backtracking a sentence or so, but I apologise for that.
No worries, no worries. I can sit and look at you, Simon, instead, because you're the only person on my screen at the moment.
One moment, Chair. I don't know quite what happened there. Just find it.
We had the pizza wheel of death for a moment.
Yes.
Yeah. There we are.
There we are. Sorry.
Is that okay for everybody? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So I was just saying that we had to act quickly, and fortunately we were all able to in transforming services. There were different approaches and decisions made at each LCA based on variants, which included our buildings and space to work in, ability to meet demand quickly and efficiently over the phone and by email, and of course the level of anxiety about coming into our offices that our teams fed back when individual risk assessments were carried out. So in Sudbury, we were quick to move over to phone and email advice in remote working, using the equipment and technology that we had, and have suspended seeing clients face to face. Whilst we've had some people working in the office to keep things moving, volunteer advisors have instead been working from home and have since benefited from our new additional equipment and technology that we had secured funding for. With our additional support to ensure their well-being and technical upskilling, this is all working well. We have also put into place provision for a limited number of appointments to be offered at our offices via a screen link once restrictions are relaxed, and as an interim measure before we can resume our normal face-to-face advice services. Ipswich LCA took steps to allow those at minimum risk to consider working in their offices, and also made adaptations to allow clients to enter the building whilst government restrictions allowed. These changes included setting up working from home for staff and volunteers, upgrading telephony systems by purchasing soft phones and upgrading their technology and IT equipment, including the purchase of laptops. Increasing paid resources to allow them to respond to increased telephone and email demands. Employing a security guard for the building's entrance to ensure social distancing. Purchasing and set up of perspex screens and sanitizer stations. 2 metre distancing measures were put into place and furniture was reallocated to accommodate them. Protocols were written and video rooms were set up for clients to have virtual appointments in safe interview spaces. Mid Suffolk Citizens Advice identified staff and volunteers who needed to isolate, either due to age or medical conditions. Additional IT software and mobile phones were purchased for those who were required to work from home. From the first lockdown to the present time, the Advice Centre at Stowmarket has remained open for staff and volunteers operating in COVID secure environments. Operational service was maintained despite the loss of 50% of their volunteer advisors and 20% of their staff who were required to shield. The remaining workforce was split into 2 groups, working alternate shifts to ensure that at least 50% of their resources would be available in the event of local outbreak. A 5-phase plan from initial response through to a return to normal service has been adopted in Mid Suffolk, and that is phase 1, email and phone advice. 2, adding virtual advice from the office to client at home or in an external setting. 3, adding virtual advice to a client in the office. 4, adding face-to-face advice in the office by appointment. And finally, 5, add drop-in appointments back when business is as normal. Next slide, please, Henrietta. So, with regards to changes in demand, this graph shows the age groups of our clients and comparisons that can be made in 2018, 19 and 20. We've always helped people from every age group, and that continues to be the case. But during the pandemic, we have seen an increase in demand from younger age groups, particularly people in their 20s and 30s. These tend to be clients who are economically active and have the digital skills to use other access options than face-to-face. In fact, this is often their preference. This new client group will continue to seek our help now that they've found us and will need our ongoing support through the coming years to cope with the COVID fallout. For this reason, our business plans include actions for retaining and developing the higher level of digital service options that we now offer. Excuse me. However, we are seeing fewer of our over 60s client group who would normally make up our majority client group. We understand that many of this group are unable to access our services by phone or email and rely heavily on the face-to-face service delivery that we're currently unable to offer. We know that this client group will be coming back to us with very complex and overdue problems once normal service is resumed. In short, What we do know is that demand for our services will not simply change back to managing the previous ever-increasing client group who desperately need face-to-face advice, but will now also include those who are able to and prefer to access our services remotely. Next slide, please. Okay, so this graph shows that there was a dip in client contacts during April-May 2020, at the time when the government support was generous. Although the issues we saw at that time were especially urgent, as people's lives were being turned upside down. Despite having closed our face-to-face services, we are now seeing more clients than we have at this time in previous years. This has been manageable, even in crisis, due to the exceptional work of our volunteers and staff, for which we are extremely grateful. All teams across our LCAs have pulled together, adapted to changes and coped with their roles, whilst dealing with the personal impacts of getting through these difficult times admirably. Just to note on this graph, we often see clients more than once in a year. This graph counts the client in the first month that we see them. So although it looks like client numbers reduced over a year, actually this is due to the way that the repeat clients are counted. And next slide, please. Since December 2019, the number of people claiming universal credit, or UC, in Babergh has gone up by 119%, and in Mid Suffolk by 122%. Something that Citizens Advice is very concerned about is that at the start of the pandemic, the government increased the rate of universal credit by £20 a week. Currently, the plan is for that to stop at the end of March. Nationally, the charity is lobbying for the uplift to be made permanent. People have budgeted for that £20 a week, and it can easily represent the money they have for a weekly shop. We would be very concerned about what would happen in April if the rate of UC is reduced. We have a high number of people on UC in the districts now, and if they suddenly find their UC has gone down by around £100 a month, we believe that we would see more families in crisis across our districts. Okay, I'll pass on to Simon now for the next slide, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Simon Clifton, and I'm the Chief Mid Suffolk. I do apologise for a bit of feedback.
We appear to be getting some echoes, Simon. I don't know if that's a problem at your end or something in the system.
I'll try again, Chair.
Thank you.
So the slide that we're seeing here is a slide to try and demonstrate our change in demand across the main areas in which we work, comparing 2018 through to 2020. The last column shows the percentage increase or decrease, which I'll go into in more detail for the main issues that we've got on this chart in the following slides. Next slide, please. So this slide has highlighted benefits and universal credit. As shown in an earlier slide and demonstrated by Colleen, the number of clients helped with universal credit has increased dramatically over the past year. The reasons for this are well known and linked to the economic and social impact of the COVID pandemic on individuals and families across our districts. The changing welfare benefit landscape is clear, with universal credit totalling 6% of all issues in 2018, but now having risen to 16% in 2020, a threefold increase. We were expecting to see an increase in growth in our universal credit issues as UC started to replace legacy benefits such as job seekers allowance and tax credits, but the pandemic has accelerated this. Over the same period, client issues or other welfare benefits and tax credits has decreased, although the decrease in other welfare benefits issues is less than the increase we have seen in UC. Although there is no exact number for the people on the job retention scheme across our districts, When it ends, we should prepare for large job losses where companies are unable to keep them employed. This will lead to further increases in those having to claim universal credit. A recent article in the East Anglian Daily Times identified that our districts, but in particular parts of Mid Suffolk, had seen some of the largest increases in universal credit claims across England in areas that had been considered by many to be within affluent communities. This just reinforces that the pandemic has widely impacted all levels of income and that there are many now claiming welfare benefits for the first time in their working life. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates the change in demand for employment advice. There was a big increase in employment issues in 2020, up by 500. There has been an increase in the number of workplace discrimination issues, such as pregnancy and disabilities, and these were particularly profound in March, April, May and June of last year, as employers and employees struggled to deal with the impact of the pandemic on their businesses. Our specialists gave a lot of advice about well-established employment issues like redundancy and also on new areas such as the job retention scheme. Due to our membership of the Citizens Advice Network, we were able to mobilise very quickly, and our employment advisors also had access to specialist teams at Citizens Advice for more difficult queries. We're under no illusions that employment advice will be a key service requirement for us in the coming months and years. Whilst the jobs retention scheme has undoubtedly reduced the numbers of people being made redundant, it is far from clear how many of those jobs will still be retained once it ends. Next slide, please. Next slide is about debt. Debt issues are significantly down for us over the past 12 months. Now, we don't think this is because there is less debt. We think it's because debt enforcement has ceased during the pandemic. As with the job retention scheme, there have been a number of protections put in place, which have included an eviction ban for renters and payment holidays for credit cards, personal loans and mortgages. Some of these are now expired, but the latest England-wide data suggests that 58% of all private renters are now in arrears. If this figure is correct, then clearly this will not be their only debt, and we already know that council tax arrears have risen significantly across both districts since March 2020. Once the protections are removed, we will undoubtedly see an increase in the threat of eviction and homelessness, along with increased numbers of people unable to manage their levels of debt. The latest extension to the delay of enforcement action against private renters is only delaying the inevitable impacts and outcomes for those who cannot pay their rent. Debt advice, by its very nature, is complex and incredibly labour intensive for our specialists. COVID has reduced the opportunities to see people face to face, and therefore we've had to use other channels, such as the telephone, to deal with client issues. This takes us much longer and reduces the available number of appointments. Looking forward, trying to forecast demand for our money advice debt service will remain a challenge. As a minimum, we would anticipate that once debt enforcement starts again, we will start to see people with debt issues at least at the same level that we did before the pandemic. However, it is reasonable to assume that we will see an increase in demand, as there are many who pre-pandemic were able to manage their levels of debt, but now find they no longer can do so. It is also reasonable to assume that we will see far more cases where urgent immediate action is required once debt enforcement is allowed to resume. Next slide, please. This slide seeks to demonstrate the demand for food parcels from our local food banks. The use of food banks has increased dramatically during the pandemic. Often used as an economic barometer, the increased demand is clearly linked to the impact of the pandemic on individuals and families and shows no signs of decreasing. Across the entire year, we have referred over 50% more clients for a food parcel. As you'll be aware, many of the food banks have reported even larger increases, which is possible as we are not their only referral agency. Through our holistic advice model, clients requesting food parcels will also be provided with help and support to tackle other issues such as the claim of their rights of entitlements through welfare benefits, debt, housing and employment advice. I will now hand over to my colleague Nikki.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to have been called back to see you all again, even if it is in this strange world. There was just a couple of bits that I needed to cover. They asked us what our current challenges are, and quite frankly, we sort of went with the top three. We've got serious concerns about the clients who are digitally challenged in light of the closure of face-to-face services by all organisations across the county. Give you an example, we had a homeless client who had to borrow somebody's mobile phone just to call us. There is a whole range of people that are very much in need of support, which they simply can't access. Broadband poverty is a real thing, as my darling daughter would say. It's a real thing, Mum. Poverty hits across all ages, all ethnicities, etc. And we've found, as I'm sure you all know, about the schools, education, not being able to get online, etc. When you've got households that can't afford broadband, it's as simple as that. Let alone those where English isn't perhaps their first language, or they've got literacy problems or learning disabilities. So there is a whole portion of society that we're really concerned that cannot get support. Not only is it about the clients that can't get the support, it's the clients' need for privacy. You know, talking about personal issues, especially when perhaps they're financial problems or you're a victim of domestic violence, you know, when they've got children at home, etc., it's not easy. It's not always convenient. When people say, oh, great, somebody will call you back, and you've got two people who are homeschooling, or you've potentially in a domestic violence situation, it's a real concern. The other aspect is the impact the pandemic's had on us, our volunteer recruitment and our volunteer capacity. Our volunteers, like all other members of the society, have been affected by shielding and childcare support. Many of our volunteers are older people and haven't wanted to continue volunteering. A lot of people are reviewing their lifestyle. This is the first time I have ever had to employ generalist advisors to be able to meet the demand that we're being faced with. You know, and I have got a concern that we'll lose the expertise, which is very difficult to compensate for. Recruiting and training in the pandemic has not been easy. And getting people to the level of expertise that's needed to be able to continue to deliver services is not a quick and easy, process. And the last thing was talking about limitations. Like every organisation, we've had to implement COVID secure working environment. Our premises, we've had to put in social distancing measures. You know, I have crawled around the floor with 2-metre tape and plastic perspex screens. They're not naturally suited to COVID-19 restrictions, with narrow corridors, small interview rooms. Some premises are shared with other tenants, etc. And making them safe is a very tall order and extremely difficult. The immediate need to update our technology and to be agile has also been a challenge. And these are sort of some of the current things that we're facing, especially as lockdown rules change and we then have to be able to adapt and move to that, but keeping within all of the constraints that we've got. So next slide for me is the question was asked, what do we think the future challenges are? Well, I'm really worried about the demand on our services. It feels at the moment like pressure that is on family that is building up, and it's building up for a number of reasons, and we can feel the pressure, and it's like a dam, and this dam is made up with all sorts of they're made of decisions. It's not made of the virus. It's made of decisions that have had to be put in place to accommodate and support. We can feel the pressure. There's a tsunami of debt. The unemployment figures are eye-watering. breakdown in relationships that have been affected, families, and continued cause of stress, housing availability, housing issues, education. Some of the decisions that have been made in order to support families, a ban on bailiff enforcement, collection of council tax arrears, the uplift of 20 quid uplift on universal credit, the extension of furlough arrangements, grants for small businesses, payments for the self-employed. We thoroughly appreciate some of the things that have been put in place, but there's also a concern. Staff have been redeployed to deliver these activities, to deliver different COVID-19 activities, such as stay-at-home payments. They're all excellent initiatives, but while they're doing those things, they haven't necessarily been doing what they normally would do. So, due to the fact that nothing is normal, so that normal council tax recovery and rent recovery and all those actions where the payments aren't received, normal actions would be to apply for a liability order from the courts, which often promotes and encourages payments to come in. But obviously that hasn't happened. The courts have a 12-month backlog. When these decisions start being, when this unlocking of these of lockdown happens, and the decisions that have been made and put in place to support families start moving, I fear that we're going to drown in this tsunami of need and and support that people are going to come out with, because, as I say, we have no control over the flow of the clients, and such big decisions when they're made or when they change, when we get to the end of March, is it then the 1st of April that we get 5,000 clients come through the door in a week rather than 500? Those are the things that are worrying us. Increased reliance on the voluntary sector by statutory bodies. We've noticed specifically in the last 12 months that with face-to-face services closing down, people working remotely right across the country, right across the county, both at district and at county levels, that it would appear that we are the port of call. We're being told to access through citizens' advice. Some of the closures of face-to-face services, there's no intention of reopening them again for all of those clients that can't access things digitally. I know that that's a concern and a worry for a number of my colleagues. There's been an additional ask on our services, we're the gateway for LWA payments, food banks, charitable grants. We are supporting the county with the implementation of the SAS, Suffolk Advice and Support Services line. There's been a heavier reliance and ask from of the voluntary sector and from citizens advice specifically, which I've got a concern isn't necessarily being understood or supported financially. And talking about money, our sustainable funding, we rely on our core funding to deliver services, and that hasn't been increased with inflation. If recovery actions have not started to be taken by the council, I'm concerned about cash flow and the impact that has on your services to deliver, along with your ability to support us. Because we know that there is so much that has stopped because of COVID. We're also concerned that the additional funding that has been available throughout COVID, that's been essential to boost capacity, it's not going to be here in 12 months' time. Although the problems created by the pandemic will be here, will still be in recovery for months and months and months afterwards. People, managing people who've got financial problems, benefits issues, employment issues, all of those things aren't magically going to finish on the 12 months after we got some extra COVID funding. you know, the clients are still going to be there, the problems are still going to be out there, and without sustainable funding to meet those demands, then, you know, we're going to be in a difficult place. So we want to look to work with the council to act now, to look at measures of how we ease the pressure off households and take steps to start cash flow moving, support households that are facing difficulties, and release the handbrake, you know, for want of a phrase, and look at what measures can be taken in a measured, proactive way to basically to be able to support things so that we're not in an all or nothing situation and the dam breaks and we all drown. So I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but thank you for that. I think there's one more slide which just shows how we work together, delivering across the district and with your priorities to build those strong and healthy communities and the housing and the assets and all of those things, and how we want to continue to work with you guys to ensure that we get the best for the communities that we live in. So thank you. I'm pretty sure that's the end of them. So we're up for your questions.
Well, I think the first thing we have to say is a big thank you to Colleen, Simon and Nikki for a very thorough presentation. However, there will be questions. I think that last slide particularly shows how closely the aims and objectives of local citizens' advice align with those of the two councils. So I now invite members of the committee, if they have any questions to the office, not the officers, the LCAs, if they could use the raise hand function, and we will go through them in order. I have Councillor Scarf first, followed by Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we heard about Diss and Thetford and the lack of a need for outreach at the moment, or they're not able to do an outreach. I wanted, is it Mid Suffolk CA that have picked up the work then, or are going to pick up the work that Diss and Thetford would have previously done? Perhaps Simon, you might be able to help me with that one.
Yes, Councillor. Well, Diss and Thetford historically were Diss and I, and therefore that's why Citizens Advice has had that positioning in the marketplace in that area of the district. Traditionally, what's happened is that Diss has looked after the northeast part of the district and has received funding for that, and they had been delivering a outreach service at the local GP surgery. At the start of the pandemic, that stopped, and that worker, their volunteer, has now left their organisation. We've already, in the past 10 months, been working in that area to put in some different projects and innovations to see if we can support the community better, knowing that that advisor had left the area. And they include that we have done some targeted outreach. We are working with a community resource known as the Bank to put in some virtual advice services. So yes, Mid Suffolk Citizens Advice in 21-22 and ongoing will now be the Citizens Advice providing the primary services for this district.
Thank you, Simon. That's very useful to know.
If I'm not mistaken, I think there's some crossover across the Norfolk-Suffolk boundary between the services provided in Norfolk and those in Suffolk, and there's a sort of give and take. Is that correct?
Yes, we work as a Citizens Advice network.
Yeah.
What's happened is the Chief Officer at Diss and Thetford has approached the communities team to say that due to the pandemic, the footfall that they normally saw in Diss has not continued, and therefore they felt it not appropriate to continue making the funding application to Mid Suffolk, and informed us of the same decision.
You don't turn away somebody from Norfolk and they don't turn away somebody from Suffolk.
Correct.
That's fine. Councillor Carter, you're up next.
Would be wonderful to work out how to do the unmute button, but we got there eventually. Right, very aware that this is a thing for questions. I'm going to question whether or not a thank you would be appropriate for how great the presentation was. It's very thorough, and especially thank you to Nikki, because if we weren't terrified before her presentation, I think we all are now. Yes, and I apologise about the background noise. My daughter is making herself aware as well, working from home. I'm assuming.
Have you a question in there, Councillor Carter?
I did have.
Okay, sorry.
Now I can't remember what I was going to say, which was.
Oh, blame me.
I'm going to blame you. What do you expect? Yes, I assume that with as with education, there's been a request for computers to be provided to use in education. Would such a request and funding be a benefit for providing computers to those who might not have them at home? And is there something we could do with assistance with funding for internet supplies, and would that be of any benefit?
Okay, is that a question for the LCAs?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, LCAs.
Any thoughts on that?
There are a number of initiatives and schemes in different areas across the county about supporting people with, laptops and iPads, etc. The problem is it's been mainly focused on those who need it on a sort of a more longer term basis, i.e. if you're homeschooling a child and that's required. But when you're talking about just accessing accessing services to be able to log in, to pay council tax and things like that, the equipment is one part of the issue and the broadband is one part of the issue. Knowing how to use it and having that support to do it, I don't, it's having access. So with things like libraries and things that have been closed, people could go in and use public facilities that don't have that at home. And of course, that hasn't been an option. So I don't think that supply of equipment is necessarily the biggest problem. It's access to it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Muller, I have you next.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a follow-up from what Councillor Scarf asked. Simon, you mentioned an innovation project. Can you please give a few more details about that, please? Thank you.
Certainly, Councillor. So last year, we became aware of a funding opportunity through National Citizen Advice from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, BEIS, which was looking for innovative ways of delivering access to advice. So we successfully bid into that and received a sum of funding, which we have used to transform our virtual access. So as part of that, as Nikki's just alluded to there are a lot of things going on, but one of the things that we did become aware of is that the county is running a digital inclusion group, and we became members of that. So we've got an in on that, and there are several working parties that come from that. What is quite clear is that the members of the group, there's not a consensus on how is best to proceed. We had hoped within our innovation project that we would be able to involve other partners, because we will not be the only people that are looking to deliver access to advice in a different way. And so we had sought some different partners, but that has not come on board. So we've had to take the bull by the horns and start our own. So consequently, at the moment, things have been slightly challenging due to the third lockdown, but we will have a device at the bank in Eye, and we have 10 sessions booked, 10 weeks of sessions booked up there. I'm also very pleased that we've managed to re-engage with Watersham Flying Station, and the welfare team are now also on board with that. So it's a bit of a plea really, because there's a lot of stakeholders at this meeting and they know other stakeholders. We believe that in Mid Suffolk we can deliver a quality service using a virtual device, and it's the case of getting people to that virtual device. And we're also training volunteers to be ambassadors to help people use that device. So that's where we are at the moment. We hope to expand that. and it's looking like it should be able to replace our outreach locations, our physical outreach locations, which means we'll be able to deal with a lot more people in a far more efficient way. So that's where we are with our innovation project at the moment. And all that information is obviously being shared across the rest of the Suffolk Citizens Advice Network, because we are a pilot.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you, Councillor Muller. I suspect that the demand for computers is widespread, not least for school pupils. Councillor Osborne, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two questions really for Colleen. First of all, the first question is, she came to a point on the last board meeting about a full-time debt advisor, acquiring one. Can I ask how that is going, and you know, how successful are you at the moment, or haven't you been able to look at anybody? And the second one was the outreach facility in Hadley. The opportunity, I think, for you to work with that outreach again, if you could just clarify that position as well. Thank you.
Okay. Debt advice, we know that we are, as Nikki was saying, going to be inundated. Nationally, our national organisation actually have preempting that demand to increase by 60% nationally. Fortunately for us at Sudbury, and I think a lot of my colleagues in other local LCAs, we were able to take advantage of a funding opportunity that came through from the MAP Money Advice and Pension Service via Citizens Advice, that has allowed us to take on a trainee debt caseworker full time. So we're sort of in the process now of growing our own fully trained up to the level of court representation money advice worker specialists. So at the end of that year of funding, we're now looking for how we can retain and develop that and keep that full-time person along with the part-time member of staff that we already have. So we're sort of preempting that and working towards being able to manage better the debt that's going to be coming through. Does that answer the first question, Adrian?
Yes, it does, Colleen. Thank you very much. And I like the phrase "grow your own." I like that one.
Yeah, that's what we have to do, because our advisors are so specialist, you know, to work in a particular category and to the qualified level that we need them to. It's very difficult for us to just put an ad in the paper and get the right person. Usually they've come from the same background, if not our own volunteers become employees. The second question, we were a bit unfortunate with regards to realising ambitions, which was a project that funded. It was a wonderful, wonderful project, and it allowed us to employ 3 very part-time generalist advisors who would be working in outreach locations, particularly GP surgeries across the whole Babergh district, right down to the Shotley and the Pensilia. I can never say that one. That's it, Adrian. Yeah, so it started. It was a large pot of funding that was awarded to many organisations, all for very, very different things. And that was the basis of our project, was to get the outreach into the social prescribing world, and to complement also the Connect for Health project that we have in partnership with Suffolk Family Carers. It was dead before it started, unfortunately, because it all set off just as the pandemic started. So our outreach is obviously the GPs weren't seeing patients themselves. We were, as in our LCA, we were actually able to still give back pretty useful reports on it. We were able to manage it, but all of course with remote advice. But the whole funding, because so many organisations couldn't manage it, was not re-awarded. So it's coming to an end at the end of March. Now, in answer to your question, Adrian, because I'm getting around to that, we started our outreach in Hadley and then in the Ansell Centre, and then that was moving into the GP surgery, and all of that was a pilot for this project that we've now lost. But there's no way that we're going to let that go. We're going to take that back under our core funding so that we can get back into the outsource centre and start talking to the GPs there too. Hadley for us is essential because we realise we just have so much of our work from Hadley and so many of our clients that wouldn't be able to access us face to face without those outreaches. So definitely I'll be making sure that the board understand the importance of getting that back into place, and hopefully there might be some funding that comes along to bring the whole project back into play at some point.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Excellent presentation to all your colleagues and yourself, and thank you, Alistair.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on now to Councillor Eppinyong, who is the last member of the committee with his hand raised. So after that, I shall move to questions from any other members present. I do have one so far. Councillor Eppinyong.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions. One probably best addressed to the officers, and the other one to the team from Citizens Advice. And as with others, I thank you for your fine presentations. So for the Citizens Advice group, what are the plans to address the kind of the recruitment or replacement of volunteers? Because obviously that's the main concern that you have, with a lot of older people disappearing from your teams. So I don't hear of what your action plans are in that regard. And as far as the council is concerned, there are broadband companies that are offering subsidized broadband access. And I just wondered to what extent we're engaging with those broadband providers like BT and so forth to take advantage of those offers of subsidized subscriptions. Thank you.
If I could just say, and I'm sure Simon might want to add the question that was directed to us. We started off very well in Sudbury. We didn't lose people immediately. People have drifted off over the past months just because things have gone on for too long, and I think the stress on individuals and the anxiety, it's just causing people to reevaluate, as Nikki says. What I do hope is that once we have come back to a more normal service, more normal world, that I will be able to call on those people. A lot of them may come back to us, especially if, I do a really emotional blackmail might be the thing that I have to fall back on there and really explain to them how badly they're needed. They will need, a lot of them, because of the length of time they've been gone, a small amount of recap training. But other than that, we'll be recruiting like mad. We now are finding that capacity is an issue where it wasn't for us until very recently. But hopefully we can pick that up. We've had recruitment drives in the past and they've been successful. Simon, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, well, from our point of view, Councillor, it's a slightly different scenario. So as we kept our advice centre open, we were able to keep more of our volunteers engaged. And that's also not just helped the organisation, that's helped some individuals as well, because it's helped their mental health by having an outlook of different to being at home. So we have lost a few, we have not lost many, but we have recruited a lot. So it's been quite a fruitful time for volunteering in the past 11 months, where people have put themselves up where they might not have done before. So we currently have 13 volunteers in training. The problem we have at the moment is capacity for the training and delivering of the training, because it is primarily been done virtually until someone needs to do their observations. And today we have got 3 new volunteers in who are observing. So we have managed to maintain our recruitment. We still receive a lot of inquiries. And our plans for the future are to further develop virtual training, because it will give us a greater pool of people that we can call on later on.
I probably should add that we saw training as being a massive issue, and the board just recently took the decision to employ a development and training officer, and we've been able to do that successfully. So that will be, as Simon says, a big help.
Thank you very much for those answers. I feel less worried.
Was a question for officers as well in there, was there not?
There was, yes.
Could I don't know if corporate manager or somebody could answer that.
I can't answer the question because I'm not quite aware of maybe the work that has been taking place, but what I can do is go back to our economic development colleagues and find out if they are involved in any work with our broadband providers, and then come back and provide a response at a later date.
Okay, is that happy? Are you happy with that, Councillor Eppingham?
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I note Councillor Morley has been incredibly patient whilst we've been getting through questions. I do have two more questions, hands raised from members of the committee, so I'd ask you to be patient, Councillor Morley, with apologies. Councillor Wellham is next, followed by Councillor McLaren, and at that point I propose to close questions from members of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. One or two queries around resources. Have the CAs been able to produce a balanced budget for the future year, and are they confident that they'll be able to do so for the next 3 years? Is financial planning for the next 3 years going to be an almost impossible task, is one of the questions. The second is, have you been able to plan for the anticipated extra workload? I've heard from Simon that there are more volunteers coming on board, but are there going to be limits to the number of sessions you'll be able to have because of the buildings and so on? And is it all budgeted for? And the third one, great to hear that you're growing your own extra staff, but what is the availability of paid staff if you need paid staff? If you've got the finance and you need to bring staff in, are they available?
Shall I start, Colin?
Okay.
So on budget, we budget 3 years ahead, and hopefully they're as close budgets for 2021-2022, and we currently are forecasting in Mid-Suffolk a 30,000 deficit. Primarily our deficit is because long-term funders are no longer able to support us to the level that they have. So Stowe Market Relief Trust have always given us a 3-year funding grant, and that grant has been for the past 6 years £15,000 a year. But because of the demands on their services, because they are being called upon to give charitable aid on a far greater extent than ever before, particularly for people moving into council and local authority housing, and coupled with their own income reducing, that has now been reduced by 2/3. There are other charitable organisations who have not been able to meet because of the pandemic as it is at the moment, or if they have been able to meet, they are in a similar position where they have reduced income and are no longer able to support us. I think part of the other thing is, are we comfortable with it? I think, is that what I've been asked? We're never going to be comfortable with a deficit budget. We were extremely fortunate last year. We received an awful lot of support. I think my colleagues will agree with that. We received an awful lot of support, but it was all COVID related. And if we look this year going ahead, everything that seems to be coming out is still COVID related or very, very, very specific groups. So that's what we're finding at the moment. But to answer that first question, from Mid-Suffolk's point of view, we are forecast a 30,000 deficit.
Okay. So if I go from there, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm having it looks like everybody's cameras have gone off for me at the moment. So I hope you can hear me okay and see me. Okay. In Sudbury, we're in a better position, so we're very fortunate, especially now that we have heard that we will be receiving something from the county council this coming year. As we've taken that out of our budget, we had a question mark there, but that will bring us into a more even position. In Sudbury, we've over the past 3-4 years, we've worked very hard to diversify our funding streams, and in fact, that's worked out well for us. So we're in a better position because those projects, some of them are sort of 3-year, 5-year projects. So we know that those will continue, and that's been the sort of planning that's been involved there. To give you an example, in 21-22, we're looking at the total percentage of our project funds as being 73% of our total income. But that's not to say that we don't still rely and are grateful for our core funding, because we rely on that very heavily, because the only way to sort of paint a picture of that is to say that the project work that we do are the branches on the tree of core funding, and without the core funding we wouldn't be able to apply or be successful in bids for the various project funding that we have. So we're over the next 3 years, our forecast is secure.
So from our point of view, as Colin says, we've also diversified our income streams as far as we can at present. One of the things that's been incredibly beneficial is the 3-year rolling funding settlement from the district councils. That has helped us go to other funders to show that we have the support of a large funder for not just the 1 year, because there's a lot that are looking for sustainability within an organisation before they will fund. And that's where we are with ours there. Yeah. I'm sorry, Councillor, I didn't write down your number 2 question. So if I go to number 3, and perhaps you'd come back to us. So I think the third question was, can we in effect use staff in an increased way to meet resource? We can, but we are a small paid resource. We are more a volunteer organisation. Funding that will be an issue going forward if we decide that we need to pay more for our paid staff, or more resource in paid staff. But as greater issue is the fact, as Colleen has said, that we cannot really advertise for somebody that is fully trained, because these people do not exist. Therefore, we have a lead-in period. But all I can assure you is that we are doing everything we possibly can within the parameters that we know at the moment to plan for increased demand. As Colleen has said, we also applied for money from the Money Advice and Pension Service to provide a debt advisor on a full-time basis, and were successful. So we have increased our debt resource threefold. So all we can do now is just look at what's coming over the horizon and try and plan accordingly, and be as prudent as we can with the money that we receive. I do apologise, I can't remember what the second question was.
Oh, I must confess, nor can I. Councillor Epinong, could you maybe repeat your second question, unless somebody else has already got the answer handy?
I'm sorry, Chair, I think it was Councillor Wellham.
It was Councillor Wellham, my apologies.
And I think it was something along the line of, you've been able to plan for the extra workload.
Well, I think, yes, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. I think Simon answered questions 2 and 3 together, so that's great. I think all my queries have been answered.
I'd like to also add, in support of Simon's comments about the 3-year funding, that has made a tremendous difference to our security and allows us to plan for the next 3 years at least. So really grateful for that.
That was very much the hope when we did the task force.
It does. It makes such a difference, really.
Can I just briefly intercede there? Has that experience of the multi-authority task and finish group, has that fed into your funding on a wider level across the county?
Yes, we've used some of the quotes and comments from that on occasion.
Fine, that's okay. It's nice to know that these things are worthwhile and are still appreciated. It was not intended to be a one-off report. It was intended to actually provide a steer for multiple authorities over a period of years. Councillor McLaren is the last member of the committee with a question, I believe.
Yes.
And we'll go to other members.
Thank you, Chair. My question's addressed to Colleen, actually. I was very impressed that you mentioned Shotley Peninsula. I'm a ward member on the peninsula, and it's in a difficult situation to access if people don't have public transport. So thank you for that consideration of the peninsula. We just hope that you can develop your programme. The other thing was that you mentioned social prescribing. I'm a great supporter of social prescribing. I support the person that works on the peninsula completely, and that is the way to go. So in your opinion, if you were looking at some sort of service on the peninsula, what sort of cost would that be? Sort of, I'm not wanting precise costs, but it might be something that we ought to work towards.
It would be difficult without putting the whole project plan together and looking at the, you know, even if you looked at the salary and the capital costs, it would be difficult without looking at how many hours you'd be offering an employee a week, you know, the area that you'd be cover, how many face-to-face or telephone hours you'd be offering clients. So that would be something, but I do hope, Councillor McLaren, that we can get that one back off the ground. It's one that I'm very keen on. So, and I know that Nikki has social prescribers in the Ipswich area that complement the service complements. We've got in Sudbury, we've got the Connect for Health person. That goes right across Babergh. The young woman in that area is called Hayley. I don't know if that's who you're referring to. Yeah, she works very close with our employee Sophie, who has the other half of Babergh. But to my mind, the perfect service adds general advice from citizens' advice into the mix. So you've got the whole thing, you've got the social prescriber or community connector. So many people use social prescriber for there are so many different models, but community connectors are looking after the health and well-being, but then referring into our generalist advisors. So our project was to marry up with the community connectors and provide the practical advice side. And that would have given each area in the Babergh district the whole holistic service.
So perhaps could, because I am really interested in that and its development, I'd be very grateful if at some point when you're considering it, you know, I'd like to be kept in the loop if that's all right.
Certainly. As I say, things at the moment, other things are in the pan, sort of thing, in the pot. But it is something it's only just coming to an end at the end of March, and we'll be looking for something to support it further. But there just isn't anything that fits that size at the moment. Okay. But it's not something we're going to let go.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Chair.
Not at all.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. I think it's fair to say that a great deal of stuff is still going to be up in the air for some time to come. Now we'll move on to a very patient Councillor Morley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm really grateful that you're allowing me to ask a question. It relates to funding, and thank you very much to Simon, Colleen and Nikki. I really appreciate all that information that you've just given us. On the funding side, on our paper, page 4, where you're talking about financial implications, Mid Suffolk and Babergh both fund Mid Suffolk Citizens Advice and Babergh Citizens Advice, but we also fund West Suffolk and Ipswich. And I'm just wondering, to what extent do West Suffolk fund our CABs, and also do Ipswich Borough make any contribution to our CABs?
Not to Sudbury.
Ipswich Borough are very supportive of Citizens Advice in Ipswich. I've had a 3-year deal with them for the past 3 years. Please note, I only have to apply once every 3 years. It works slightly differently. But as I say, again, that's not index links, that hasn't gone up. What has happened is Ipswich has expanded beyond its boundaries over the last, over the last few years, and continues to do so. So there are parts of Mid Suffolk and Babergh that use Ipswich services and facilities. The one that I'm really quite disappointed in more than anything else is our East Suffolk colleagues, the old Suffolk coastal, especially for the amount of clients that we support around the Kesgrave, the Kesgrave areas and Martlesham areas, which technically fall into Suffolk coastal, and they don't show any support, financial support whatsoever towards Ipswich. But as I say, a percentage of the clients that we see are from Mid Suffolk and Babergh, and we're very grateful for the support that you give.
From a Mid Suffolk point of view, we receive no funding from West Suffolk. So we receive no funding from West Suffolk. I think it's fair to say that, I mean, Nikki's mentioned there that Ipswich has joined its borders, but just for everybody present at the meeting, so we're all clear, we are a network across Suffolk. So we all see each other's clients from time to time. So Mid Suffolk sees a proportion of Ipswich, and Ipswich will see a proportion of Mid Suffolk, and likewise for Babergh, and the same does apply for West Suffolk. What we don't want is we don't want to get into a postcode situation due to funding, because that does not help the client.
No, I accept that we are a network, and I'm just trying to understand the extent to which, you know, Mid Suffolk Fund put money towards Ipswich CAB, but Ipswich don't put money towards our CAB. I'm just trying to understand that relationship, that's all.
I note, Councillor Morley, that Tom Barker has his hand raised. He may have something to add at this point.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Yes, if I can just come in, I'm conscious that we're in a period whereby the questions are for the citizens' advice themselves, and Nikki Wilshire provided an answer in terms of the Ipswich citizens' advice. But as Councillor Morley has kind of re-explained, I think her question was not so much about what Ipswich gets from Ipswich or what Mid Suffolk gets from Mid Suffolk, but whether, because Babergh and Mid Suffolk are both funding outside of district, whether each of those citizens' advice get any funding from outside of district. And Simon talked about it being a kind of Suffolk system whereby there's a recognition that Ipswich CA might get Mid Suffolk residents, but equally Mid Suffolk CA might get Ipswich or residents from Bury St Edmunds or where else it might be, depending on where people work and all the rest of it. And I suppose I just wondered, a question perhaps to Simon and Colleen, was whether you have made funding applications to either West Suffolk Council or Ipswich Borough Council and had those rebuffed, or whether you just simply haven't made the applications.
I think before my time there may have been applications, but not in the 5 years that I've been in Sudbury, and we don't receive from anybody other than our own county and local districts authorities.
We don't make an application to Ipswich Borough, and West Suffolk's is via a community chest by which we're not invited to apply.
I think at this point I should maybe mention, and I think all this stuff is incredibly interesting, but of course we are here to deal with the funding provided by Babergh and Mid Suffolk District Councils, and we should concentrate on that because that is what we have any direct influence over. Sorry, Tom, did you have something I got wrong there?
No, not at all. You're absolutely right. I wondered whether, as officers, we should take away to have a conversation with Ipswich Borough and with West Suffolk at an officer level, to have a conversation with their teams to see whether there would be a means through which we could seek some, I don't know, quid pro quo, I suppose.
No, I've got your idea there. Colleen, do you have a thought on that?
Just to say we could support that, we'd appreciate it, and we could support it with statistics, Tom.
And I will just add from this committee's point of view that it's entirely in keeping with the multi-authority task and finish group approach that was made at the end of the last year, or sort of at the crossover between 2 years, that produced the recommendations this committee gave last year. Councillor Morley, have your questions been answered?
They have indeed. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move to Councillor Ayres, who will be, I think, the last questioner in what's been a rather extensive questioning session. Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'd just like to say thank you again, Colleen, who I've known for years because I support you from Sudbury Town. It's interesting that you were saying how so many of the elderly needed face-to-face and when you will be able to do it, because as you know, sadly, we're losing our access point from 5 days a week to 2 days a week, which I'm really not happy about, as everyone's fully aware. But I just wondered when you'll be able to have face-to-face, because it is so important, particularly for the elderly, the disadvantaged. And thank you for your presentation. But it is a big concern of mine, because some of these people will never, ever, we've been told, oh, it's a digital, everything's going digital. But I don't think it's going to happen to some of them, sadly.
No, I think Nikki's explained that, Sue, and it's not only the actual physical equipment, it's the ability to use it. When we can go back to face-to-face, I hope it's next week, but it's not looking good. But let's hope it's not too long. And a lot of our people are very keen and are having, the jabs now, and hopefully things we're coming out of the other end. But what we've all done is we've set up these virtual interviews in our offices. So that's a little bit more COVID secure. And what we can do in those sort of interactions with clients who would struggle themselves is talk them through the use of the equipment that we're putting them in front of, so we can actually have a printer and scanner in the room where things are being printed out for them. Somebody will be talking to them and looking at what they're doing. The whole setup, the interview will be set up when they sit down in the chair. So that's the best idea that I think all three of us have got at the moment for that. Yeah. And of course, as soon as face-to-face services can be resumed, as I was saying earlier, there's a little bit of the differentials are with regards to the office space that we have and how we can use them. We have 2 interview rooms that we will be able to use initially face-to-face, because they're the ones that we don't have to go through the corridor to, and we can get people in there without travelling all around the building. And I think the setup's the same for my colleagues too. They've identified the rooms that are the best to use.
Well, so, sadly, Colin, we haven't got that in the library, because I was at a meeting on Friday afternoon, and these people, some of them do need that their privacy because of their problems. And also, we've been open all the way through COVID. We've been open for those desperate people who we really do care about. But thank you, Colin. Thank you.
Not at all, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Ayres. I think we're a little bit in danger of extending beyond our remit here. Now, I note Councillor Carter has his hand raised, but I was prepared to close off questions unless your question is something so dramatic, Councillor Carter, that you need to raise it now.
I can make the suggestion off meeting, and I'll allow for all the process to carry on.
Thank you. I'm just aware that time is pressing, and we have covered a great deal of ground. My thanks to everybody involved in the questions. At this point, if we've gone through the questions, I'll now open the item up for debate on both the report and the presentation. If members could use the raised hand function. Would anybody like to kick off? Well, I'd just like to raise one point, and it does address the elephant in the room, in that the recommendation made by this committee last year and to last year's cabinets was that not only a 3-year rolling arrangement be made with the LCAs, but also that it should be index linked. Now, in all the fuss and bother around this last year, we were reviewing the citizens' advice rather later in the year than we would otherwise, and it became apparent that the proposed sums were in fact exactly the same as the previous financial year. I raised this point at the Babergh Cabinet, and I don't know if Councillor Wellham was able to do so with the Mid-Suffolk Cabinet, that it had been the intention and recommendation that a index linking now be applied. I received an informal acknowledgement of that, both from officers and the cabinet members at the Babergh Cabinet meeting, to the extent that where finances allowed, that it could be accommodated within the final budget that we'll be voting upon in our respective councils next week. So we received a preliminary, this is myself and Councillor Wellham as chairs, indication that a index linking of approximately 1% might be applied. Now, I have to say, 1% is obviously better than nothing, but it doesn't seem to be a great deal of index linking. So I would like to suggest that perhaps, obviously we're quite happy with the recommendation in the report up to that point, but I believe we should still address the index linking that we'd originally recommended last year. That's consistent with what we've done before. Can I hear any thoughts from members on that point? Councillor Scarf.
Yes, Chair, I think your point is a very valid one, and I would suggest perhaps that the 1% is a little bit parsimonious. I would have thought that we would be looking nearer to 2%. As a suggestion, I would be happy to support you if you're wishing to propose a motion or anything in terms of a slightly higher increase than that. It's for others to decide, but obviously yes. I think it's for us to suggest that they may decide. I also have a further point, which if you'll come back to me a little later, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, if you can. I'd like to deal with this issue for the first moment. I see Tom Barker has his hand raised. Tom, as communities is very much in your bailiwick, what would you say on this?
I'm conscious, thank you, Councillor McCraw, conscious that you're in debate and it's not really probably my place to step in on that debate, but I just thought on this point, you've got an item later on the agenda that provides you with an update on the grants review, and that discusses moving to a kind of two-phase grants review, whereby in the first phase we looked at capital grants and minor grants, and the second phase would be looking at revenue. And I suppose my instinct is that all of our revenue grant recipients are equally important and provide fantastic benefit to the communities that they serve. And on a kind of fair and equitable basis, I wonder whether you wanted to build the inflationary increases into phase 2 of the revenue grant review, rather than dealing with it ad hoc relating to the citizens' advice and then other revenue grant recipients as part of that grant review. So I just thought I'd let you know that that point could potentially be covered on the item that you've got around the update to the grants review. Well, it is. I take your point, Tom. It's a very good one, but I note that in the report from front of us, we do have a suggestion 11 consultations, ongoing dialogue continues with all CAs as part of the grants performance framework. I believe that's what you're referring to here. I was referring to as part of the grants framework, we have an ongoing dialogue with our grants recipients, and as such we're in constant conversation with the citizens' advice. But running separately from that, there is a member working group comprised of 2 councillors from Babergh, 2 councillors from Mid Suffolk, so it's Councillor Davis and Councillor Carpendale, I believe, from Babergh, and Councillor Flatman and Councillor Wellham from Mid Suffolk, who are looking at the grants process and will be looking at revenue grants imminently. That process has been delayed a little bit because of responding to the COVID pandemic, but that grants review is separate from the ongoing dialogue that we have with grants recipients, and that grants review would feed into looking at amendments to the process that we use for our revenue grants. I appreciate that's a possible route, Tom. It's a point, but I mean, I'm keen that we should actually be consistent in the recommendations that the committee have made. And having made a recommendation from this committee in a previous year, I believe we should be consistent with that. Councillor McLaren and then Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to support what you were suggesting. Because we have listened to a service this afternoon that really needs to have the facility to develop, that there's lots of work out there. So I think for some increase on a regular basis should be considered. I'm not going to say what percent, that might get me into trouble, but I think it should. I'm fully supporting your proposal.
Well, on the level we're talking about, 1% will be representing not thousands but hundreds of pounds. So we're not exactly talking about. That's a start, isn't it? It's a start, but I think it's important to just get this into perspective. And I know that finances are always tight, but where small surpluses are forecast in a budget, I think it's allowable to make the suggestion that the index linking that this committee recommended last year be continued. Councillor Wellham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's very difficult to know what it should be index linked to, because we often link things to CPI, but when CPI is very low, demand upon CA is probably very high, so, and we can't very well have an indirectly proportional index linking. But I do think that something like 2 or 3% would be reasonable for the current for the next 3-year period, and then who knows what after 3 years.
The recommendation was that index linking be subject and part of the annual review, which in the Babergh case, in actual fact, was a job given to us by the Babergh Cabinet, that is for the Babergh Committee members. We were specifically charged with that review function. Having been charged with it, I believe we should endeavour to fulfil that responsibility. So I would like to propose an amendment to the recommendations that states that we confirm our previous resolution of the last review, that the 3-year review figures be subject to, and I think all we can say at this stage is indexation to be determined, and obviously with reference to finances available. I think we're all understanding of that point, but I think the point should be made in a recommendation. So that's what I'm proposing. Henrietta, would you? I'm proposing that. Henrietta, would you have a form of words that I've just given that would be appropriate there? Hello?
You apologise. I shall put camera. Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry. I might need to get your wording again a little bit, but you
we confirm the recommendation previously made the previous review, that the 3-year rolling review be subject to indexation on an annual basis.
Yeah.
Finances permitting.
One moment, please. Finance permitting.
Finances permitting, as a measure of the importance we attach to LCA funding.
As a measure of importance.
Ongoing LCA funding.
Sorry, Chair, attach. Measure of importance we attach to the funding. Right, let me just get that.
Can you read that back, Henrietta?
Just one moment, Chair. Just give me 2 minutes.
Sure. I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Scarf.
Okay.
Right, so we have that the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee confirmed the previous resolution of the previous recommendations that the 3-year rolling funding be subject to indexation, finances permitted, as measure of importance we attach to the ongoing funding.
Can you add in after indexation on an annual review basis?
Yes.
Let's leave flexibility in there.
Review.
Councillor Scarf, were you wishing to second, or did you have a point to make?
Yes, Chair, I would be very happy to second that.
Thank you.
Certainly. Would you like me to put this in the chat function,
Well,
or are you happy for me to read it aloud again?
No, I think we have the essence of it. A little more discussion from members. And then I'll address a query from Councillor Grandon. Councillor Grandon. you had some doubt as to what part of the debate you'd have been able to follow.
I'm not sure we can get Councillor Grandin in at the moment.
It may be that Councillor Grandin is having some difficulties.
Chair, I've noticed that the Jan Robinson, the corporate manager for law and governance, has asked to speak.
Yes, certainly. Jan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, councillors only need to be in the room for the whole of regulatory committees, so that applies to planning and licensing. Councillor Grandin can vote, but needs to be pretty sure that she has understood and heard enough of the argument to be able to take a decision on that.
Okay, I think that's fairly clear. Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. Well, let me just switch the video on. It won't.
Okay, we can hear you.
Yeah, one of the things which I should have asked about when we were asking questions was about the role of observer. It's very good to have the annual review that we're having today. That's really useful, and we've learnt a lot from it. But I understood from what Councillor Osborne has said in the past that his role as the observer appointed by Babergh District Council is very useful to the District Council and to CA. I just wondered if it was possible to ask the CA officers from Sudbury and from Mid Suffolk, firstly, whether it is useful having an observer, to hear from Colleen, and for Simon to tell us whether or not he would welcome an observer.
That formed very much part of our recommendations when we were reviewing participation on appointed outside bodies. So technically it doesn't fall within, but I would be interested if you could briefly answer, please, because a yes or a no or something very short, because time is wearing on.
Okay, I'd say, and I'm pleased to know that Councillor Osborne agrees, that we think that's a very positive arrangement, completely positive. Can't think of any negatives there at all. Councillor Osborne was able to advise us about various project schemes, things that may be of interest where we can support the local authority. And equally, I think that he has a really good understanding and insight into who we are and what we do and where we're heading forward. And he's always been completely supportive of us. And yeah, no negatives, all positive.
Well, we just hope that Mid Suffolk officers and cabinet members will take note of that. And it was, of course, a recommendation out of our review of outside bodies. Thank you very much, Colleen. No. Any more debate from members, please, at this point?
I'd just like to thank Colleen for her words there. I'm very embarrassed about that.
Well, none of us had any doubt about it.
Not at all.
Councillor Scarf, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, the recommendation we've got in 3.1, I think, really doesn't go quite far enough in recommending from our committee that we heartily endorse, I think, the contribution made by Citizens Advice. That's very evident from today's meeting and all of the previous meetings that we've had. And the recommendation 3.1 is just to note the report, which doesn't really go far enough, I feel. I think words can't describe how I think the committee feel about CA's involvement on behalf of our residents. So I wondered if we could perhaps include something like that. I appreciate it's very difficult to do it in an electronic vote very quickly, but something along those lines.
If we could add that we commend the work of CA as fulfilling the points made in the reason for the decision, perhaps. If the reason for the decision could be made 3.1, that we are satisfied that Citizens' Advice, etc., and then we are not just noting it, we are confirming that as a positive. So yeah, 3.1 would then read the Overview and Scrutiny Committee are satisfied, etc.
I think that's very good, Chair.
And we commend the work of LCAs that we contribute to.
Indeed.
And then 3.2, as I've recommended, has also stressed the importance that we attach to the work of the LCAs. Would that be sufficient, Councillor Scarf?
Yes, that certainly would.
Well, I'm happy to make the proposal and carry on with your seconding of that if you were happy.
I will happy to second that, Chair. Yes.
I think that's a form of wording that covers most people's views. Councillor Muller?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could we just have Simon's comments about an observer at the Mid Suffolk Citizens Advice Trustee Board meetings, please, Chair? Thank you.
Yes.
From a Mid Suffolk point of view, we have no issues whatsoever. Our colleagues tell us it's positive. Why would we say no?
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think that confirmation is all that is required. So, members, unless there are any other points of debate or anything else to discuss, I would like to propose we move to the vote.
Chair, I have another issue which I referred to earlier. Apologies, Cameron. This would be a matter that would just affect Mid Suffolk Overview and Scrutiny Committee members. It has no bearing on Babergh members, so it would have to be dealt with separately. But I'm wondering, bearing in mind what we've heard about Mid Suffolk CA taking over effectively the coverage area for Diss and Thetford with its outreach, whether we should look at reallocating the sum of money which I believe is in the budget for Mid Suffolk from Diss and Thetford for this particular year only to Mid Suffolk CA. It appears that they are going to pick up the responsibility and indeed the costs associated with, and I wanted to move a motion that reflected that, conscious of the fact it only applies to Mid Suffolk's Scrutiny Committee. I wondered if you could rule perhaps on how we might be able to do that.
Well, the first thing is to establish whether that is in fact the case, that the responsibility is being transferred, because I got the impression it was a two-way process. The figure mentioned here, amount awarded 2020 to 21, is £8,810. Do we have confirmation that that is what was proposed or is included in the budget for 2021 to 22? Can an officer help with us for that, Vicky?
Yeah, sorry, I saw Tom's hand up, but that is currently in the budget for 21-22.
If Diss, Thetford and District CA do not require that money, the proposal then would be that that money be transferred to the Mid Suffolk CA. Is that correct, Councillor Scarf?
That's absolutely correct, Chair.
OK, that would be a separate recommendation for the Mid Suffolk members, would require a proposer and a seconder. I think it's a valid recommendation. Tom Barker.
Yeah, sorry, just on a point of procedure, I suppose. The revenue grants are delegated to officers within budget. So previously the ONS reports went to Cabinet because the 3-year rolling arrangement wasn't something that was in our kind of grant processes and procedures. So that was a departure, and so Cabinet reflected on that and looked at it. The allocation of grant monies within the overall grants envelope. So within the budget setting, we have an overall grants pot, and that overall grants pot is proposed to carry forward for next year. So I wonder whether you'd like to leave it for officers to discuss with Diss and Thetford and Stowmarket citizens' advice, and subject to Diss and Thetford kind of withdrawing, whether Stowmarket amend their application that they've made to us by an amount equivalent to the sum that Diss and Thetford were going to receive, and then we can simply deal with that at an officer level within the allocations, bearing in mind, of course, the clear steer that we've had from this committee. I wonder if that's the most kind of straightforward procedurally.
Councillor Scarf, effectively, we're being asked here if we are prepared to provide that steer and a clear direction for officers and delegate the authority to officers in conjunction with the LCAs to come to an arrangement. Would that be sufficient?
I think that's an eminently sensible suggestion, Chair. It leaves the final decision to the officers and gives them the flexibility that they may require to deal with Diss and Thetford. The intention, however, is that any monies that are unspent in the budget are actually transferred to the CAs as and when each of them require. So I think that adequately covers it. Thank you, Chair.
In that case, I don't know that necessarily requires a recommendation. The message has been sent, received and understood. So I propose for the simplicity of the timescale involved, that we just allow that to go forward as discussed now. Thank you. That's great. I think we can now go to the vote, which we're applying to both councils on the two resolutions. I believe Councillor Grandon had queries whether she was able to vote. It's my understanding from the corporate manager, Jan Robinson, that is the case. She's understood the nature of the debate, heard the presentations, and this is not one of those committees where there is a question about having to be present for every second of the meeting. So yes, Councillor Grandon, you may vote. Hand over to the Governance Officer. Henrietta, would you like to start the vote, please?
Yes, Chair. Are members in agreement of the recommendation? Do everybody understand them?
I believe so. We've read them.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm just making sure.
And I think even with the possibility of some minor wordings, the intent is absolutely clear.
That's fine. Let's go. So the vote is in progress, Chair.
And the blue line, it's further down the page, so you may have to hover to get the line to thicken so you can reach it. So.
Chair, so we have everybody has voted and it is 12 votes for.
Thank you. So that is carried and will be sent forward where it's required to be sent. Thank you very much, members. Thank you very much for the representatives of the LCAs, Colleen, Simon and Nikki. Thank you to officers. An extensive coverage of the subject, although we could have gone on a lot longer. There is so much to do. Item 12 on the agenda is an information bulletin. Now, this information bulletin contains responses raised at the Babergh Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting in January, but includes information for both councils. It arises out of a question raised in the chair's briefing arising from that meeting, and a tabled paper was agreed to be produced for this meeting in the chair's briefing from Lee Crowdell, the Tenant Service Corporate Manager. If members have any questions upon these specifics in this, I'd ask them to address them to the Governance Officer, and responses will be provided outside the meeting. This is merely for information, but since it arose out of a meeting, we thought it should be returned to the meeting.
Chair, may I?
Yes, by all means.
Just to let member know, there was actually a supplement paper published earlier this morning explaining further some of the queries that was on the paper at the chair's briefing. So there are actually, in fact, 2 information bulletins at the moment.
If members can note both those papers, the original and the addendum, and raise any questions they have through the Governance Officer, it may result in something further in the future, but not today. Okay, item 13 is a community grants review update. I'm just trying to find the page. Which paper would that be in, Henrietta? Is that in the...
Chair, we do not have a paper for this one. This will be a presentation.
Thank you very much. In that case, I'd ask for the presentation to be delivered by Vicky, I imagine.
Thank you. Henriette, is it yourself or myself who's going to share that presentation?
Would you share it? I can share it if you want. I just need to find it. Wasn't aware. One moment, please.
That's okay. I think whilst the presentation is being found, that the last Task and Finish group, which is a council-led Task and Finish group looking at the community grants programme, it was felt appropriate that we just updated yourselves on progress made with regards to the grants review. Like Tom has alluded to earlier on in this session, the review is divided into 2 phases. Phase 1 was very much looking at the capital grants, both minor and major capital grants, and second phase is looking into the revenue grants. So we have all but concluded the capital grants, albeit some work is still ongoing. And we have just agreed a scoping document for the second phase, and that will begin as soon as we possibly can. We've got a bit of clash of priorities at the moment, so as soon as we can start on phase 2 of the review, we will.
Thank you. I think that's pretty much covered everything. Are there any questions on the community grants review update?
Is there a presentation or?
There isn't. It doesn't seem to be a presentation as yet. I don't know if we're going to have to defer this. Here it comes.
I will be brief if you like, Chair, because I recognise that the time.
We have some time constraints, yes.
Yeah. So in effect, what I've done in this particular presentation is I've added the first 2 slides are literally just what we've managed to complete with regards to the grants review. The second slides, second set of slides, which are just about how we've managed to spend both the capital and revenue grants over this last financial year. I'm more than happy that you just take those away, and if anybody's got any specific questions about those, I'd happy to answer those outside of this meeting. But in terms of the community grants review so far, we've had a look at what we have currently produced over the last few years, and in no particular order, the types of things that we've made some improvements on are things like KPIs, monitoring and managing better all of our capital grants, and actually being in a position whereby we have an appreciation of what we have typically spent and supported over the last few years. Also to keep a really watchful eye over the types of applications that are coming through into the team as we progress through the year, so we can actually do some profiling of our grants funding as well. We've also included KPIs and amended some of our processes so that we can look at the types of projects that we are supporting as well. So we're developing some key performance indicators around how our capital grants are supporting different types of projects, whether they be wellbeing projects, projects for younger people, projects for older people, active living. So we can actually start profiling and then map that across our 2 districts as to where predominantly some of those activities and projects are taking place, so we can see where the bulk of our finances are going, and where we might see some quiet areas. We'll do some proactive advertising of our capital grant schemes to actively pursue projects or place-based projects in those areas. We've also made some changes to the sort of grants policies. We were providing a third of project costs, or to a maximum of £25,000 over 3 years. We've changed that slightly to reflect that we do expect applicant organisations to contribute 10% of project costs. So that was 40% provided by a grant, kind of sort of brings them up to that magic percentage of 50%, which we know is seen as a bit of a test bed for the viability of projects to other external funders. So it just kind of makes it easier for them to access other external sort of resources and make those projects seem more viable. So we've done that, but also we have responded to the Council's declaration of climate emergencies and included that contribution to 50% to those projects which are showing that they are making a number of energy efficiency improvements to within any of their projects. So village halls, including solar panels, so to speak, in some of their redevelopment projects. We've looked at the priorities for grant funding as well, and a number of the priorities that were being used to allocate particular grants were outdated and linked to the old strategic plan. So we've now kind of revised that, created a new mission statement, as well as a number of different priorities that encompass all the new policy documents, such as the community strategy that underpinned the joint corporate plan. So we've just brought those more up to date as well, and made sure that those priorities for Babergh and Mid Suffolk are also aligned, which before they weren't. We've also made a few changes to locality award terms and conditions, and that's more about creating some flexibility in terms of what the funding can be used for. And Josh and the team has set a number of created a number of presentations to train councillors in what that funding can be used for. I think that there's been a greater degree of use of that funding, obviously, in Mid Suffolk, but we felt with Babergh coming on board this year with locality awards, it was just worthwhile to take the opportunity to look at what the criteria was around that and make any amendments now, and then to share that learning and sort of training programmes with all councillors. And we've updated and sort of slimlined the processes with regard to our grants processes. So Currently, there is 2 forms, and we've now streamlined them, so there's 1. So we had 1 form which all organisations had to provide their own details, and there was a phase 2, part 2 report that they had to also complete, which then detailed all their project details, and both forms repeated a level of information. So we've managed to condense those and make them a lot easier. They will also be digitized and used on our website as well, so it makes it easier for the applicants to complete those. They'll also be, and the data that's stored in there will also be easier for us to access and do some mapping with that information, so we can always do some better searches, because at the moment when we want to search on particular applicants, it's a really quite heavy duty spreadsheet that we have to look through. So we're just trying to modernise our processes, but very much accept that whilst we digitalise, and we've heard through the conversations with the CAs today, we don't want to leave anybody behind in that respect, so whereby people still need to have written paper applications, that we still manage to, we will still support groups to complete those, and we will do the behind the scenes updating of various digitised forms. We also appreciate that there is going to be an increase in demand for some of our grants in the coming years. We, on some of the slides that will come after this particular, later on in this presentation, there's a clear line, particularly in the major capital grants, where we are seeing a much greater spend, and that's primarily because our grants team are being far more proactive than they ever have been in ensuring that we support community grants. However, we also appreciate there is going to be a greater demand for some of our funding. Therefore, we have developed this scoring matrix to better equip our team to, both through sort of transparency and fairness, be able to judge on each project on their merits, so that if we are ever challenged as we go forward, we've got a very open and transparent process that we can share with people and kind of feedback as to why projects were or weren't successful, and that's been missing from the grants programme at up to now. We've also talking about publishing locality award spends on our website. I know the County Council do that very regularly, but we're proposing that for the time being we do it at the end of each financial year. We've also created new grants databases which are being developed as we speak, and again, touching on what I've talked about earlier on, this will provide us a much better tracking and mapping of our grants. So like I said earlier, where we can see then where the grants are being spent in our 2 districts, what level of spend is being allocated, and for what types of projects are being spent, and we'll kind of map that against what we know our community needs, where our community assets are, and make sure that whatever we are doing is as fair as it possibly can be. So in terms of the community grants, I think Henriette, if you could move forward on the slides. Yeah, that's pretty much where we're at with the capital side of the grants review. Like I said, we are now moving on to the revenue side of the review, whereby we will be looking at all of our processes, all of those applications and organisations that come for funding each year, and just doing a thorough review of what it is that we're funding, whether they meet our corporate priorities, and how we can better support some of those groups with different ways of working with us, seeking a further additional funding for them. But also we know that when applicants often apply for revenue funding, in amongst all of the work that they're doing, there are pockets of capital funding. So it might be that we can redirect some of those awards to the capital pots as opposed to revenue funding, so that we can try and make our pennies go further. I don't know how you feel about me continuing with the rest of the presentation, because the rest of the presentation isn't quite what was asked for. It's more about the spend that's been allocated this financial year. Like I say, I'm more than happy to talk through the slides.
I think, Vicky, I mean, effectively, this is an information update. And of course, I think members should be advised that this is, after all, the subject of the work of the Grants Review Task and Finish Group. And there is little point in our duplicating or attempting to duplicate their work. This, I would say, has been the year of the grant for one reason or another, from government, central government, from this aspect of local government, from all over the place. I can only commend and congratulate the communities team, and indeed all the other people they drafted in the course of the last year, in distributing the grants as quickly and efficiently as they did. I mean, it's rarely been seen for local government to be moving so quickly and so responsively. And I think that's often been overlooked as we've got used to the system or the changes in the world in the last year, that we've forgotten just how fast the council was when things looked really bad back in March and the summer of last year. So congratulations to the communities team and all officers involved in grants. If members do have any questions, perhaps they could hold them to the Task and Finish group or officers. I'd note Councillor Morley wished to say something there. Councillor Morley? Oh, no, Councillor Flatman, I apologise. Councillor Flatman, as you're the Cabinet member.
Thank you very much, Chair, for letting me speak, because I know you're in a rush. I'd just like to thank the communities team. This has been a very difficult year for them, and they have been absolutely brilliant in everything they've produced. I mean, to carry on with these reviews and things at such a difficult time. And I'd like to thank the Task and Finish group, who have put such a lot of work into. But, you know, they've just been brilliant, the communities team, absolutely brilliant. And thank you to all the staff, Vicky.
Thank you.
Yeah, there have been, I'm speaking for myself here, but I hope for a number of other members, there are times where it's difficult to be a councillor, but it's been a real pleasure to be proud of the work carried out by the council on residents' behalf. Whether it be appreciated or not, it certainly has been appreciated by a number of my residents and the people I know. Can we now move on, though? Thanks have been noted. We'll move on to the item 14, which is the forthcoming decision list. Do members have any comment on the forthcoming decision list, which is circulated to all councillors every week? OK, in that case, it's just for noting. And of course, any point can be raised during the week itself. Items 15 and 16 are the Babergh and Mid-Suffolk overview and scrutiny work plans. Does anybody have any comments? You will note that the meeting of the 19th of April is blank because we will be in a pre-election period and it is not going to be appropriate to be holding meetings at that time. The rest of the work plan for the year is fairly clear, and obviously a new work plan will be shortly prepared towards the end of this calendar year. Any comments, anybody? Please use the raised hand function, otherwise they are for noting. And with that, the meeting is concluded. My thanks to all members for a lengthy but I think comprehensive study of the subject. The next joint overview and scrutiny committee meeting will be on Monday, the 22nd of March at 9:30 AM. And I therefore declare this meeting closed with my thanks to everybody involved.
Thank you.